The precautionary principles as a regulatory tool will also remain. Many regulators see it as a convenient tool in place of more expensive and complicated risk assessments. And here are 3 decisions where, for example, the Paraquat decision, where Sweden was able to take the European Commission to court and persuade the European court to basically allow the banning of Paraquat throughout Europe. Policymakers and regulators will do everything possible to halt the further dilution of power. For many of them, and they'll never tell you this publicly, but basically in private, after a glass of wine or 2 or 3, they see deliberation as more or less a facade. And they're not going to work with the NGOs. They're very clear. Policymakers like doing policy because they love the power of it. They don't make any money doing it, really. I mean, if they make money, they become an industrialist. But they love the power, and they want to keep that power to themselves. They don't want to share that power with NGOs or anybody else. That's pretty blunt. Somebody told me that for dinner a few months ago. I tend to believe it. One issue is that some countries are more ready for a new model than others. What I'm concerned about here, having spent time in various different countries, Estonia, for example, a few years ago, is that these small member states of Europe will have much more difficulty to cope because they have much less resource. So how many people do you think work on communications in the Estonian food ministry in Teil? Anybody guess? 3. Good guess. 0.25. Okay? How are you able to cope with a scandal in Estonia? And that's the problem, is they won't be able to cope, and it will leave Estonia very quickly, and they'll end up on the shores of Sweden as well as the shores of here in Austria. That's the problem we're going to have. Furthermore, aggressive media will lead to continued public distrust of policymakers and regulators. I see an export of the British model to the rest of Europe. The UK media is by far the most aggressive in Europe. And now, I don't know how it is here in Austria, and now Sabrina can answer that question in her presentation. But I see, for example, in Sweden now, Sweden is trying to copycat the UK media. They like it, they're being so aggressive, trying to hammer, Prime Minister and the like. I mean, a very well-respected journalist is Jeremy Paxman, who speaks on the evening program, Newsnight on BBC Two. And he was basically, one stage he asked the policymaker the same question 17 times. He didn't get an answer from him. And again and again and again. And similarly, he asked, for example, the Prime Minister Tony Blair, do you pray with George W. Bush? And he didn't answer the question. So you didn't answer it, Prime Minister, do you pray with him? I want to know. I mean, very aggressive, interviewing techniques. And the Swedes, at least, they love it. I don't know how it is here in Austria, but I'm sure it's Sabrina can. Not the same, okay. So going forward, how can we best sort out these teething problems? Regulators. Ensure that regulators and policymakers are prepared for transparency era. Going forward, we will have more rather than less transparency. And I think in many of the regulators, people are not simply ready. And when we're calling for more transparency, that means there'll be more resource required on you. You'll be forced to communicate more back. And for example, the concerns I have for a number of European agencies, and their communication departments are simply too small. And for the EMA, last time I counted was 4.5 full-time equivalents. And hopefully I'm telling them to grow quickly, please. Because as soon as you have more transparency, it's like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. You can't put it back in again. Once it's out there, it's out there. And you need to be ready for it. We need to develop rigorous models or frameworks for where the precautionary principle should and should not be used. A good example, the European Commission's communication on topic from 2000, the concerns many people have in Brussels is this communication is simply not followed. We should fund more research in order to make deliberation best work. How can we move away from the self-selection process? The crucial issue going forward. And ensure the communication director within a regulatory agency is part of the executive function. In many agencies, I don't know here in Austria, the comms folks are seen pretty much as, riff-raff, right down the food chain. In my view, they should be actually on top of the food chain in the executive meeting rooms and talking about these issues. Communication is far too important to basically become second best. And final slide share is for the scientists to promote independent scientific advice. It's something that was discussed in Brussels just last week, with the caveat, though, that this will require government to become a larger funder of university departments, so I don't see that happening soon, unfortunately. Promote the establishment of a genuine European Academy of Sciences, set up specifically to reduce scientific uncertainty, maybe possibly based on the US National Academy of Sciences. And finally, for the media, this is something I'd love to have a discussion on in the Q&A after Sabrina's talk, the establishment of some form of media guidelines to ensure that the media does not unnecessarily amplify risks, in which many cases should be, when risks should be attenuated, and ensure they communicate numbers accurately. I think in this day and age, when we see basically journalists being fired, particularly science-based journalists, we see it happening, for example, in the UK now, as well as Sweden, is that the media will become worse rather than better communicators of science, risk, and uncertainty, unless we can help them. On that note, I want to say thank you very much.